So today we're going to be continuing on with the RB25 Neo cylinder head. Last video we assembled this cylinder head, stock valve train. Now we're going to be installing the camshafts and measuring for shims. I've gone ahead and already done this, installed the cams and measured for shims, but we'll go ahead and do a quick run over just so you kind of get an idea of what you need to do and some things to look for. So now that you're going to be going ahead, you're going to be shimming your cylinder head. One thing I like to do just to make it simple, you don't confuse your locations by recording it on a piece of paper or elsewhere. I like to measure my clearances, and I note my clearances on the top. This is my valve lash clearance before we do the shims, and then on the bottom here I like to record the shim thickness itself. That way this information is related to this bucket. Same moving on, this one, this one, this one, this one. That way you can record what you have and then calculate what you need, and you don't confuse the locations of things. You can obviously, when you measure your required shim clearance and you need to record on a piece of paper, obviously number it how you think you'll remember to do it, but I like to do cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then break it into 4. So you can record it however you want to, but I like to write on the cylinder head itself. We're going to be using a thinner oil just for the assembly, so it's not too messy. We do have to stick shims in here. We don't want an assembly lube sticking everything you're using. So as long as you got some sort of lubrication that's not too thick, you can use whatever you want, but this is just my preference. And then you go ahead and install the cams. Just like in the previous video, we always start with the two that are facing down, the two lobes that are facing down. So now we have the cam installed, we'll be checking the valve lash clearance. The specification on the RB25 Neo cylinder head is 19 and 12 thousandths of an inch, so 0.019 and 0.012. We'll have the specifications in the bottom of the description. We do on occasion run them a little bit tighter if there is an issue with noise or anything like that on a cylinder head that has previously been diagnosed as a valve lash sound. We'll tighten it up a little bit. Usually the cam lobes wear down a little bit as well, so we need to tighten it up. One thing to note as well, when you're shimming a cylinder head like this, on occasion if you bolt it down to the block, it creates a bit of distortion, and it will open the clearances or tighten the clearances depending on how the cylinder head bolt affects the cylinder head itself. On Subarus this is greatly affected. When you bolt down the cylinder head, it will distort greatly and you have to redo your shimming. RB25s is not as prominent, but when you do install the cylinder head to the block, always double check. Alternatively, you can also install the cylinder head to the block and measure your shims from there. Just note that you cannot rotate the cam freely if you do not put the cylinders or the pistons in the correct position down. Okay, so now that you have the cams installed, you go ahead. This specification is 0.019 thousandths of an inch. You can work in millimeters as well if you want, you just have to convert it. So we're going to start with the first one here. So obviously you can tell that's a little too loose, both sides. I previously measured this, so this is what it's going to end up being, 0.023. So I just pretty much run my shim all the way through. So we'll do a 0.020, test fit that in there. Still a little loose, I can feel it, not quite tight yet. Move up to the next one, 0.022, feels a little tighter, not quite the grab you want. Moving on to 0.023, that one's pretty good. That one's got the tension you need. Now that it's flat and up against the shim itself, you should be able to just pull that out with a little bit of tension. So that's what our final measurement was. We repeat for the rest of them. One thing to note, you can measure each valve lash clearance as long as the base circle is facing down somewhat. So notice how this is not facing completely straight up. This one is. You can measure this one, this one. You could even measure this one here as well, because this base circle is still pointing down. If you're unsure or you want to be very, very accurate, you can always rotate the camshaft, just like this one here. So it's facing up, measure it, rotate it again until this one's facing up, measure it. One thing to note as well, if you do install the other camshaft, the valves will touch if you have a high enough lift cam. So you got to be careful with that. I always try to do one, take it out, do the other one, take it out. So now that we've measured for our shim clearance, we know what clearance we have, which is the first number you need to know. We'll go ahead, we'll take our cam out, and then we'll measure our shims, figure out which shim we have, and then from there we do a little bit of math and figure out which new shim we need to put in there to get the correct clearance. Alright, so now that you have your cam out, you can start removing your shims. You can start with whatever one you want, but I'm going to start with the one that we were measuring originally. So first thing you're going to want to do is measure the shim thickness itself. I always try to stay in the center. If you do measure around the shim, you'll notice that it varies, so you kind of have to take the average. This one's 0.0951, so I got that written down here already. That's what I expected to see. So you're going to want to take your measured valve lash clearance, which in this case is 0.023, subtract your desired factory clearance, 0.019. The difference there you're going to add to your total shim clearance. So we're going to have 0.09515 plus 0.004 thousandths of an inch. And then that'll be your correct shim. You put your shim in there, and then you can move on to the next one. Okay, so now that you've measured your shim thickness, you can take your actual clearance and your desired clearance, run the calculation, figure out what shim thickness you need. You can go ahead and order every shim you need for your cylinder head. So now that everything's installed, we can go ahead and we can put our assembly lube in. The RB25 cylinder head does allow you to install the cams and then install the cylinder head on the block. Some engines do not allow that, so this is where you would stop. Usually on some other engines, install it to the block and then install your cams onto the cylinder head. Run your timing belt and all your accessories, and then carry on from there. So we're going to go ahead now, we're going to install the cams, put my assembly lube on. Now that we have everything installed, it should be pretty straightforward. These shims are available on our website. They are available in the RB25 Neo, the RB26, and the 2JZ. We are able to order custom shims as well if you are looking for those. Now that you've got your cam reinstalled into your cylinder head, we can go ahead and take your desired clearance that you have, the shim, whatever specification your cylinder head has. You can go ahead and you can check each lifter valve lash clearance to make sure that what you've measured and what you've installed is the correct clearance. For our final check, we'll just go ahead and we'll run the shim in here. A little bit of tension on there. This is the specification we're looking for. Do keep in mind, manufacturer spec will allow you to go plus or minus 1 thou. If you do things in millimeters, just convert those into millimeters. It's the same. So now you're going to go ahead, you're going to install your second camshaft. Be careful checking the other side, obviously. If you're using a high lift camshaft and you're rotating the cam without turning the other side, the valves can contact underneath. I'll install this camshaft and I'll show you what that looks like. Cams are installed, you've got your assembly lube on. You can go ahead and you can clean off all the markings you've made. I just use Sharpie on the cylinder head here. It likes to stay, and it doesn't wash away with oil if you don't get too much oil on it, but it does wipe away with rubbing alcohol nicely. One thing to note as well, I do put the shim clearance specification just at the front, so I don't ever forget what it is. So I'll record that at the front there. So for this one, the intake was 0.012. So you're going to want to go ahead and you're going to torque your cam caps down. The torque specification for this RB25 Neo is 6.7 to 8.7. Okay, so a couple things to note when you're assembling your cylinder head. You're always going to want to make sure the orientation of your cam caps are correct. So these ones are marked E1, E2, E3. A lot of the older generation RBs are not. So if you're going to be taking these off, I recommend always scribing a mark facing one of the two directions and then numbering them. So if you're going to mark it on this side, make sure they all face this way, and then number them 1 through 7. And then also make sure you have them marked exhaust and intake. Now as well, as I mentioned previously, now that we have the cams installed, if you're measuring your valve lash clearance and you have both cams installed, say you happen to open the intake valves all the way and the exhaust valves all the way, they will contact. It's not as big of an issue on a lower lift camshaft, but if you do get a larger lift camshaft, this will do enough damage to break the valve guide or bend the valve itself. One last thing I like to do when we're assembling the RB cylinder heads, a detail that's often overlooked first of all, is the sealant that goes in this edge here, right along here. Just seals from oil escaping around the valve cover gasket and past the cam seal and out the front. As you can see on this one here that's still installed, this little area here will leak oil if you do not put sealant on there. So you can remove the cam cap off the front. Don't worry about any sort of tension on this area. You won't do any damage. Cleaning the surfaces of both the cylinder head and here. And then while you're at it, you can also install your cam seal. It saves you a lot of time and frustration of trying to hammer it in. Slides in like that, and you apply just a very light bit of sealant. You want to apply just a little bit. You don't want to block the little passages in here. This is an oil return passage. And then you can install your cam cap on there. with the cam seal in place, make sure it's seated all the way back. And then you can torque this cam cap down and move on to the next one. So that's all the little tiny details that are involved in shimming your cylinder head. If there's anything that was unclear, if we missed something that you'd like to cover, feel free to leave a comment below. I can answer any questions or create another video if there's enough interest in that. Once again, we do have all these items in stock on our website. Shims are available in stock and special order. We have the cam seals, and we also have other components that also are commonly found in these cylinder heads.